Okay, now it is my pleasure to introduce Charles Coe, who happens to be a staff member at MCC and fondly referred to as our resident poet, but he really is our resident poet. He's the winner of an artist grant himself in poetry from MCC and now coordinates our literature and music grant programs. His work has appeared in numerous literary reviews and magazines. A volume of his poetry, Picnic on the Moon, has been published by Leapfrog Press. Charles also appears on two spoken word CDs. In a moment, you'll know why. Get Ready for Boston, a collection of stories and songs about Boston neighborhoods, and On One Side of the River, an anthology of Cambridge and Somerville poets. His poems have been set to music by composers Julia Carey, Beth Denish, and Robert Moran. In addition to poetry, Charles writes book reviews that have appeared in publications such as the Boston Phoenix, Ararat, and Northeastern University Magazine. He's the co-chair of the National Writers Union Boston chapter and very prized by his colleagues at MCC. Charles?
Nina, thank you. And good evening to everybody. Good to see you all here this evening. Before we get going, I'm going to say just a little bit about what we're doing here. The Artist Grant Department of the MCC, that Nina referred to briefly before, hands out fellowships, individual fellowships to artists. And that's a very competitive program that, as important as it is, serves a relatively small number of artists. So a few years ago, the department decided it wanted to provide some services, some activities that would provide more support, encouragement, inspiration, practical assistance to a larger number of artists. So an event like this is one of the resources the agency is trying to bring to the table. And the reason we're doing an event like this basically is because when you look at what it takes for a working artist to gather resources, information, and inspiration, one of our most important resources is each other. So tonight we have a wonderful group of panelists who's going to share with us some of their insights and resources. We'll have a chance to share our insights and experiences among ourselves, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I wanted to just sort of set a little tone for the evening by reading a short poem by a poet named Marge Piercy, poet and writer, because there's sort of a subtext to me for this evening. How can we as working artists survive and prosper in a culture that seems often not only indifferent but even hostile to those efforts? And I think one of the most important qualities an artist can come to, beside artistic creativity, is perseverance. So I'm going to read a poem that's about perseverance. This is To Be of Use by Marge Piercy. The people I love the best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge into task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands. But the thing worth doing, well done, has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were meant to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. So we have three artists this evening who have deep commitment to doing work that is real. We're going to hear a little bit more about them and from them in a moment. But before we get going, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about how we structured this evening. We're going to hear about 10 minutes or so from each of the artists. After we've heard from the artists, there are some questions that we've prepared for them that will give them a chance to sort of tease out and discuss among themselves some of the issues and challenges that they've confronted as working artists, and I'm sure many of us have as well. And then afterwards, we're going to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion, open discussion. So if you do have questions, please, if you would hold on to them until after we get to the Q&A. And with that, we shall begin. Our first panelist, to your left, Laura Harrington. Laura's plays and musicals have been produced regionally, off-Broadway, and in Canada. Recent productions include The Book of Hours, Sizbaji, a chamber opera commissioned by Leon Major, score by Yi Sung Lee, and The Midway Project. Ms. Harrington teaches playwriting at Harvard, MIT, and Wellesley College. Her awards and honors include the 1996 and 2001 Clowder Playwriting Competition Award, a Bunting Institute Fellowship at Radcliffe College, a Whiting Foundation grant, the Joseph Kessler Ring Award for Drama, Opera America Development and Commissioning grants, a Boston IRNE, or is that pronounced EARN? An EARN Award for Best New Play, a New England Emmy, and a Quebec Cinematique Award. She was a recipient of an MCC Artist Grant in Playwriting New Theater Works in 1997 and 2005. Laura.
Good evening. It's really lovely to be here, and thank you to my fellow panelists. It's wonderful to meet you. Great to be here at BC and with the MCC. I'm going to read you a brief scene from my newest play. For those of you who have already seen this play, I guess the pleasure will be in the fairly ridiculous sight of seeing the playwright try to do all the voices. But let me put the play in context for you. This newest play is called N. Bonaparte, and it's kind of the culmination of probably about 10 years of my work where I was really looking at war and the costs of war. It began with my exploration of Joan of Arc, a warrior saint, and carried me through to looking at the Civil War and then into civil war reenactors, and then to the Battle of Midway, a major battle in World War II, The Book of Hours, which is about the early days of World War I, which I wrote as we were invading Iraq. It takes place as Germany was invading Belgium on their way to France. And then finally, Napoleon, and why Napoleon? What's this all about? I felt like Napoleon would allow me to really explore how war and violence is like a virus that moves through the centuries, and that things that seem that are happening today are terribly, sort of desperately rooted in the past. And believe it or not, this is also, even though it's a piece that wants to be about important issues, I also really like to be funny. So there are definitely comedic elements to the piece. And what you need to know to understand this scene is that the play takes place while Napoleon is in exile on the island of St. Helena. And I want you to imagine that you've met I don't know who his counterpart today might be, maybe our late Pope, but he was the most famous human being on the planet when he went into exile. And he was so feared by the joint nations who had finally defeated him at Waterloo that it wasn't enough just to put him on the island of Elba, which, as you recall, he had escaped from and returned to fight again. But they put him as far away as they possibly could. The pictures that were popular in France romance at the time depicting Napoleon in exile literally show the poor little emperor stuck on a rock in the middle of the ocean, which I'm sure is what it felt like to him. And if you could further imagine that he's in a house that is crumbling around him, where it is so damp and unpleasant and windy, damp, windy, cold, unpleasant, that the wallpaper is coming off of, just peeling off of the walls, and that there's a smell of rot everywhere, and that the floors and the walls and the ceilings are so thin that he can hear the servants copulating on the floor above him. And they're utterly and sort of horribly plagued by rats, to the degree that every evening before they eat dinner in the dining room, the servants have to go into the dining room with little pieces of tin and tap new pieces of tin over the new holes in the floor every single evening. And if you will also imagine at the same time that in these circumstances, we're trying to maintain the most lavish court. We're trying to recreate Versailles under these circumstances. So for me, this is a situation that is ripe with humor. It's incredibly ironic to see this man, the most famous person on earth, brought so low. And so one of the things that I did in this play was create a chorus of rats who are constantly with Napoleon. And he develops initially, he wants nothing to do with them, but as time goes on in the play, he develops a greater and greater relationship with them. And as I was writing the play, and my process of writing, we'll probably get into this more later, is very much a process of exploration. I'm not interested in knowing where I'm going. I like to discover where I'm going. And as I was writing the play, I was lying around taking one of those inevitable naps, and I imagined Joan of Arc falling through the ceiling. And one thing I forgot to tell you is that Napoleon spent so much time in his bathtub on St. Helena, and it was a lead tub, that it's said that he wore a groove in the side of the tub with his hand. And I thought, wow, okay, what's he doing in there? He read books in there, and he ate in there, and there were servants employed 24 hours a day to keep water hot so he could have a bath at any time he wanted. So what happens if Joan of Arc falls from the ceiling? What's this relationship going to be like between the two greatest French icons, right? And when I got that image, I knew that I had the play. I still didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I had the elements of the play. So I'd like to read you a scene, a fairly short scene, I'm going to be under my 10 minutes, I promise, that takes place after the British government, knowing how unhappy Napoleon is with his living quarters, have brought him a miniature wooden palace that is filled with furniture. It's a big dollhouse. He's so offended by this that he and Joan take Joan, of course, is a figment of his imagination, but theater is magic, and there she is on stage. They take this to one of the cliffs and throw it off. So I want you to imagine the cliffs, the wheeling birds. You would hear the sound of the birds made by my fabulous actors, and the crashing waves. As the birds are crying and wheeling in the wind, the rats have followed them, of course, because the rats want this house. They want to sleep in those beds and eat whatever's in the cupboards, and they want to drink tea like the English, is what they say. But the rats are a little distressed that's going over the cliff, and the rats say, "What are they doing?" "They're throwing our house into the sea." "No, stop, wait, don't." And there it goes. They throw it into the sea and watch as it floats down, and Joan says, "There it goes, look, it's floating on the wind." "Not for long," says Napoleon. "Will it float, do you think, sail away?" "No, it will sink as surely as what? As surely as we will all die. Look, the birds are attacking it. There it goes, there it goes." And the rats echo, "There it goes. Ah." Joan says, "I can't see it anymore. Oh, I wish we could stand inside one of its tiny rooms and ride to the bottom of the ocean floor." "Why?" says Napoleon. "I'm curious. What if we could see beneath the earth's skin? A river of blood, an acre of bones," he answers. "What if you could see with the eyes of God, if God has eyes? Could you see beneath my skin, the earth's skin? And if you could, what would you know?" "No one knows anything. We make everything up to suit ourselves mostly." She answers, "When you think about it, everything we touch, everything we breathe, eat, smell, has touched the dead." The rats answer, "Perhaps we are the true instruments of immortality then?" Joan, the dead are in us, in our minds, in our hearts, in our muscles, in our bones. The rats chime in, our stomachs. Napoleon asks, do you still hear voices, Joan? You're in his presence, isn't that right? I mean, I know I'm not there, but if I thought anyone might be in the presence, if there is a presence, then surely that would be you. It's not what you think. What? I'm not allowed to talk about it. Oh, come on, the rats say. Why not? She answers, I'll tell you later. You mean when we're all dead? It's really not important. So tell us. Nothing is static. So, everything changes. What do you mean? All the time. Wasn't God the ever-constant, unchanging one? Even God. Even God what? Changes all the time. Like a shapeshifter? Like a river? Like time? Like breath? Napoleon says, like me. When France wanted a first consul, I was first consul. When France wanted a king, I was king. And when they wanted an empire, I was emperor. Joan answers, I was a child, a warrior, a heretic, a witch, a shapeshifter, a martyr, a saint. But never did I dare place myself in God's realm. Oh, live a little, Joan. Be bold. You were daring as hell when you were alive. I was instructed. We were both sent to save France, and I succeeded, whereas you, she answers, without me, you would be nothing. I am the image of the warrior saint, the savior of France. You borrow the image from me. Play on my martyrdom. He boasts, I was 26 years old when I came to power. I was 14 when I heard my voices for the first time, 30 when I became first consul, 16 when I raised an army, 17 when I lifted the siege at Orleans and crowned the king, 34 when I became emperor, 18 when I walked through the fire. I am France. No, I am France. The rats say, you're dead. Never, never, they both answer together, we will never die.
Laura, the rat actors who are employed, were those union rats or non-union rats? Those were non-union rats. Okay, we can have a discussion about that later. That's great. Thank you. Our next panelist is Tommy Neblett. Prometheus Dance co-artistic director Tommy Neblett, along with collaborator and co-artistic director Diane Vanitas Noya, creates powerful choreographies that resonate with beauty, honesty, and passion. Since 1997, Mr. Neblett has co-created 20 works and has been named Best of the Year in Dance by the Boston Globe in 2000. By the way, Tommy, where did you say your collaborator was this evening?
She's working with the mice and soldiers at a nutcracker.
So do you see there's a subtext, a sub-theme of that we're developing this evening? I think you may have something. Tommy has taught extensively both abroad and locally, including the Boston Conservatory, Walnut Hill School, Emerson College, and the Boston Ballet Summer Dance Program. Numerous awards and honors include a creativity grant from the National Endowment for the Arts in 2000 and 4 artist grants for choreography from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, individually in 1996 and collaboratively in 2000 and 2004. Please welcome Tommy Neblett.
Thank you for having this. For my presentation tonight, I'd like to just show you a small video documentary that WGBH did for on Prometheus Dance in 2000, the year 2000, for a show called Apocalypsis that we did. It was the first incarnation of this piece that we did at the Emerson Majestic Theater with some of my students from Emerson. 2 years later, we reconstructed the piece, enlarged it, expanded it, and performed it for 2 weeks at the Cyclorama. This happens to be the original incarnation that they did this piece about, and it was on Greater Boston Arts, if you remember that show. May it rest in peace. wonderful show. Somebody help me. It worked earlier. It did.
We heard this story of a little Albanian boy who was traveling home from Macedonia to Albania, and he had to cross a minefield.
He was an orphan, a little orphan boy.
And the only way he could get safely across the field was by throwing a rock in front of him for every step he took.
Trusting that between him and the rock, he would be avoiding a landmine.
He would throw another rock. He would walk to pick it up. He would throw another rock. And eventually, he was safely home. Walk, push, keep rolling. We're in the middle of creating an evening-length work entitled Apocalypsis, about refugees. You're supposed to go that way.
You can go anywhere, you can do anything with modern dance in any capacity that you want. Purely creative.
Prometheus has been around for 13 years, and we've done a variety of light and dark work. Anything from domestic abuse and rape and AIDS to a humorous version of musical chairs. The game is about musical chairs gone wrong.
The only difference is here that there are enough chairs to go around, so why is everybody scrambling?
Mainly, for the majority of the work we do, we like to tell some kind of story. Between Blood and Bone is a duet about two people who cling to each other and support each other, but they're in a situation that's trying to destroy them. When we were choreographing that piece about halfway through, Kosovo had just happened. It was fresh in our minds, and I think we wanted to make a statement about that because we felt so helpless.
For me, it was inevitable that we've created a larger piece from this duet because of the feeling that I got in the performance of Blood and Bone, fleeing and frightened and in a state that I have never experienced as a human being before. And I thought it would be interesting to develop a larger piece to see where we would be able to go with it.
When you come in from the side and you're rock throwing...
Apocalypsis involves Prometheus Dance, our company of 7 dancers, and 16 of my students from Emerson College. When you take something as horrible as the refugee problem, you can't put the refugee problem on stage as it is in real life, because that ends up being journalism in a way, and we have to find a balance between the truth and the aesthetic.
Yeah, great. Can you hold me up there a little longer? Yeah.
Apocalypsis is a very complex piece. And there's one section where the men leave the women, the men run to the wall and slam up against the wall repeatedly, and I think that's out of frustration. They don't know what else to do. So I had the men run, jump, turn around again, over and over and over and over again until they're exhausted. They have to come back to the women, basically say, sorry, we couldn't do anything. We're stuck.
Let's try it one more time. Okay. Ready, and throw. While the men are throwing themselves against the wall, the women are moving in certain almost frustrated gestures. And my idea was that it's what women most often do, not knowing where the men are, where the children, their young boys have been taken, in that they are unable to do anything but wait.
We're working with a composer named John Cusiak, who's going to be writing the majority of the music for Apocalypsis.
As I'm composing, I'll try to have a mental image of some of the dance movements that I've seen Prometheus do in their rehearsals. There's two levels of tempo going on where the men are dancing a very fast movements, running in place, and the women are doing more slow, stylized movements. And I found that particularly challenging. The way that I tried to solve that problem was in creating a fast-moving underlying rhythm and then overlaying slower-moving parts, the melodies, the oboes, and clarinet pieces. I hope that the music altogether, when it's played with the dance, will evoke a very strong emotion in people, a sense of how they might feel if they were refugees and were being forced from their home.
As soon as the music is on, as soon as we're doing it, the character is right there.
As a dancer, it's very satisfying to be able to portray this and have it real. And we're always being told if it's real for us, it'll be real for the audience.
This whole company are people who have done a lot of reading and a lot of listening hard and hearing about situations, refugee situations, and we all have these images in our heads, and we carry those images with us. The movement takes us there. The music carries us through the space. Your physicality, your emotionality, your empathy, what you see come out of us is all of those pieces that come together.
Our intention is not for the audience to get depressed when they see this kind of heavy work, but to engage the public in a way that we perhaps might make a better world in the future, to move from those places, darkness.
That was a wonderful show too, and it's hard to picture why it was decided that that's not, we don't need that kind of programming in Boston anymore. Excellent. Well, our third panelist is Elizabeth Raven. Elizabeth is the highly regarded author of the novels Awake, The Honey Thief, and Unravel. Her short story collection, Have You Seen Me?, was selected by Richard Ford to win the Drews Hines Literature Prize from the University of Pittsburgh Press. Her stories and essays have been widely anthologized in Best American Short Stories, Prize Stories, the O. Henry Awards, Best American Essays, and Pushcart Prize, Best of the Small Presses. Elizabeth is an associate professor of English at Boston College. She was a finalist for an MCC Artist Grant in Fiction, Creative Nonfiction in 2004. Please welcome Elizabeth Graber.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Can everybody hear me in the back? Yeah, okay. I've never gotten to do something with choreographer and a playwright, so I'm actually really excited about the interdisciplinarity of this, as well as many of the issues that I hope we'll discuss. I am going to read from the sort of close to the beginning of something that I don't even know what to call, because I'm so in the middle of figuring it out. Laura, when you said you sort of explore as you go, I'm working on a project that a few of my DC pals here have heard a piece of already at an arts festival here a year or two ago, but it's, I don't know what it is. It may be a collection of linked stories, it may be a novel in stories, it may be linked novellas, and I'm going really slowly. And so I actually had brought something, the beginning of which I read here about a year ago, and I'm going to jump in a little farther in simply to show a few of you that I've done something since then, but not much. I'm doing a lot of research, and so I'm just going to orient you a tiny bit. This is from a piece that at this point is not done, but is about 65 pages long, so I guess it's either a long short story or a short novella or something. And it's going to, I think, be sitting inside a larger project of stories or novellas set all in the same place, which is a little spit of land in South Dartmouth, Massachusetts, called Masham Point. And it's a spit of land that juts out into Buzzards Bay, and it's actually a real place, and some of the characters in this piece are based on, or sort of you're using as a springboard real people, so that's been an interesting process for me. This particular chunk of it is set during World War II in 1942, when there was an army base at the end of the point, because of the geography of this point, it's sticking out into Buzzards Bay. The army came and took over some of the summer houses that were on this point. And my central character here is a Scottish nanny who has come to the United States about 9 years prior to work for an American family who summer on this land. And her name is Beatrice. I think that's all I need to tell you. She works for a family called the Porter. So I'm just going to jump in a little ways into this piece, which is called Jane's All the World's Fighting Ships and Aircrafts, which is the title of a military manual. Read a few pages. She takes care of a child named Janie and works for a family called the Porters. And the Porters have 4 children, one of whom, Charlie, is off at war. So again, I kept noticing echoes. I don't have any rats or mice in my piece, but there's war everywhere. It's the world we live in. Outside of the house then, a tremendous rumble, a dreadful rolling, grinding noise, and the children's laughter stopped. Bea turned and looked out the front window at 2 lorries going by, soldiers in the back and hanging on the sideboards. For a moment she felt a great surge of fear or patriotism, excitement or remorse. Her brother Callum, his right leg shorter than his left, was an air raid warden in Glasgow. 2 of her cousins were in the war. Still, until this moment, it had all been quite far away. What on earth, said Mr. Porter, but by the time he'd swiveled round his wheelchair, the lorries, trucks, were gone. If it wasn't safe, we wouldn't have come, but of course it wasn't safe, not safe enough, else why would almost all the other families have left their houses empty, the point a quarter as full as it usually was, except for the end, which was overstuffed with men, machinery, and guns. The family came, she was quite sure of it, because to be here was as close as they could get to Charlie, who was off at Air Force training school in Texas. As soon as he earned his wings, he'd be shipped off. Charlie's Beetle Cat is still in the boatyard and needs to be put in. Don't carry off the pieces, that's Charlie's favorite puzzle. And his room was kept ready and empty, his fishing poles in a corner, his Yale pennant and a photo of his girlfriend Suki on the wall. He was their firstborn and only boy, handsome, charming, fast, and funny. And he loved this place as nowhere else. Bea was not fond of him especially. He brought the devil out in the girls and did not pay her much mind except to tease, but even she startled when she came upon his empty sand shoes in a closet. Even she saw, in the faces of the soldiers on the point, Charlie's face. Every day, the moment the postman came, Mrs. Porter was at the box. Often, a letter arrived, and once a week or so, a phone call. When Mrs. P. got a letter, she turned and took it upstairs before sharing it with her husbands and daughters. One day, she passed Bea and Janie on the stairs, they coming down, she going up. Her hands were empty. The postman had just come and gone. She met Bea's eyes. "Be grateful you don't have any," she murmured. It was a terrible moment, one Bea would never quite forgive her for, though as the years passed, they became in their way dear friends. Now Bea put her hand on Janie's knobby little shoulder. "Nothing today," said Mrs. Porter helplessly, and she reached out, toward Janie, toward Bea, then let her arm go limp. "Suffer your tongue," Bea wanted to tell her. It was something her grandmother used to say, but she said nothing. Janie said nothing. They were alike that way. It was nearly lunchtime, but Bea took a hunk of bread, 2 apples, and some cheese down the path to the beach that day, and did not scold Janie for soaking her hem as she looked for hermit crabs. Above them, the sky was empty. In the distance, the Elizabeth Islands were green and low. "Skip a stone with me," said Janie. Her brother knew how, her sisters too. Bea's brother had also known how, but as far as she could remember, she'd never tried. Together, she and Janie found flat stones, bent their wrists in, flicked out, watched the stones sail over the water and sink down. "No matter," said Bea. "Yes, matter," said Janie, and she flung a stone over her shoulder in the wrong direction, where it disappeared among its kind. "You'll learn," Bea said. "You have to teach me," said Janie. "Aye," said Bea. Janie's sisters ignored her mostly, picked her up now and then, whirled her around, then ran off to where? Did they speak to the soldiers? She wouldn't doubt it. They disappeared down paths. They went up to the attic, where it was too hot to breathe. Except you can't. Now there was a hard fury in Janie's eyes, a blue-black rage she never let her parents see. You can't. You don't know how. Never enough, and why should it be? Water not blood, wages not a wound. Except that the love she felt for this child was the thickest love, aside from what she felt for her own mother, that Bea had ever known. A week later, she was coming back from swimming with Agnes, and they met Smitty for the first time. "Good afternoon, young ladies," he said, taking off his cap. They laughed. Beatrice was 36, Agnes 34. "Good afternoon, young soldier," said Agnes, bolder, prettier. As a girl, she'd won medals for her dancing, the sword dance, the Highland fling, the reel. The soldier was tall and broad, red-faced from the sun, and no boy himself from the look of him. "Oh," he said, "not from these parts?" "Scotland," said Agnes. "And yourself?" "Me? Shipped to this hunk of rock from St. Louis, Missouri." He turned to Bea. "And you?" Bea wore a towel coat over her bathing suit, her white rubber swim shoes stuck to the paved road. Her hair, always her best feature, thick and brown, was damp. The swim cap never kept the water out. The rest of her was pink and salty, a slab of fish. Behind them, the maids were coming along. They swam at the dock at the same hour, and those who could not swim watched. Her answer came out sounding more like a question. "Scotland as well?" "Better to be here right now," he said. "You watch the little blonde girl, don't you?" She nodded. The maids had caught up now, 5 or 6 of them hovering. Their hour break was almost up. "Cute kid. Reminds me of my niece," he said. "Bring her by when I'm on gate duty. I'll take you to the PX when I get off. She can pick out a candy bar. You too." Bea shook her head. "I thought the sign says..." The man shrugged. "Your neighbors. I'd get clearance in a flash. Anyway, we're all in this together, aren't we?" He looked at her then. Later she would wonder why, with the flock of them all there, he fixed on her. She should have said no. The child's parents would never allow it. She should have stayed on her own side of the fence. Instead, she said nothing, but she smiled slightly, her mouth twitched into it. "Sergeant Raymond Smith," he tipped his cap. "Smitty." "She's Beatrice, Nurse Beatrice Emily Grubb," Agnes said, and the others rocked with laughter. "A nurse," he said? Staunching the blood, cleaning the stumps of soldiers. It was the most important work, and in another life she would have done it well, but she was grateful not to have to. "Children's nurse," she said. Janie will be needing me. It's time I get back. Jane's all the world's fighting ships and aircraft, Smitty said. At the time, she had no idea what he meant. Speed, bonny boat, like a bird on the wing, onward the sailors cry, carry the lad that's born to be king over the sea to sky. Her grandmother had sung it to her mother, and her mother had sung it to Bee, no matter that none of them had ever been to Skye. And Bee sang it to Janie when the child came to her struck by a quiet panic in the middle of the night and slipped silently into bed and asked for nothing, just turned her back and lay, waiting for a cuddle and a song. The songs rose almost of their own accord from Bee's half-waking body. Can you know hush your weeping, oh? Ah, the wee birds are sleeping, oh. Picture a really good Scottish accent, but I can't do it. Once Janie was asleep, Bee would lift her up, take her back to her own room. It was getting harder as the girl grew bigger and tuck her in. In West Orange, she had to walk out her bedroom door into the hall and through Janie's door to return the child. But on the point, their rooms were connected by an inside door, and they each also had a door to the hall. They never spoke of these visits in the morning, so that Bee sometimes wondered if Janie even remembered that she'd come. When Bee was small and had a fight, it was her mother she'd gone to, crawling out of bed, squeezing past her brother's trundle bed into the kitchen where her parents lay heavily sleeping. There, she would lean in through the curtain and prod at her mother, and her mother would heave closer to the middle to let her in. Her father always smelled of sweat and railway yard, and her mother smelled of soap and Coleman's starch, and one night Bee came upon them atop each other. She looked, then looked away, and the next night her mother told her she was old enough to stay on her own at night. And so she did, that night and the next and forever after, until she grew up and her mother grew sick. And then her father moved in beside her brother, and Beatrice slept with her mother in the kitchen bed, which seemed to grow bigger as her mother grew smaller, and then it was pennies on her mother's eyes and rest in peace and ache. It was not that Janie's mother did not love her, was it? No, there was love there. Bee knew it, but it was of a peculiar kind. Now and then, Bee would catch Mrs. P stopping in mid-stride to stare at her daughter, just stare and stare, as the girl sat drying at a table or ran across the Gray house's front lawn. And she read to her, Mrs. P did, from stories about princesses and gardens, and books by Mrs. Porter's own mother, Mrs. Parsons, who was an expert about flowers and ferns. This, the reading, took place in the summer during Bee's swimming hour. After lunch, she would bring Janie up to her mother's bedroom, where Mrs. P, who was not a still woman and might have gone all day until that moment without sitting down, had often drawn the curtains halfway shut and was sitting in the love seat in the half light, waiting. Janie, Mrs. Porter would say, Mummy, what shall we read today? You pick. Have a nice swim, Mrs. P would say sometimes to Bee, or thank you, Bee, or sometimes nothing at all, turning straight to Janie and a book. Did they talk together, mother and daughter, during this still, odd hour to themselves? Not much, Bee thought, but she could tell that for Janie, this was the best time of day, the thing to wait for. Though Janie, so thoughtful already, Bee had seen to that, and some children could be so cruel, knew better than to say it aloud to Bee. Bee would leave them then, walk down the stairs, feeling always light and free, but also wobbly, untethered, a balloon let loose from its string. Then to Agnes and the others, the chatter and the water, the sea-cold suck. She liked to swim, especially early in the season, the shock of it around her ankles as she went down the ladder at the dock, the way, as you went in further, it became the thing you were used to, and it was, of course, the same water as the water on the other side.
Beautiful stuff, Elizabeth. Thank you. Or secret, quiet little tragedies. Now we have some questions that we're going to open up some conversation with our panelists, and you can answer these questions in any order you want, bat stuff back and forth. We'll be pretty loose with this. But one question is, when you all decided you wanted to be artists, what were some of the changes you realized you needed and wanted to make in your lives?
I didn't know I wanted to be an artist, actually. after 2 years, this was in 1980 when I went to college. After 2 years of being a veterinarian, I accidentally found myself in a modern dance class, and absolutely loved it. And the bug bit, and it was history from then on, much to the chagrin of my parents. Even to this day, they still wish I was a veterinarian. But my life totally changed at that point when I realized that I was going to be a floor-starving artist the rest of my life, but happy.
Laura, Elizabeth? Could you move up a little bit on the mic, just a bit?
When you first knew you were an artist, or when you first actually made the adult decision that that's the life you were going to go for?
It could be either way. When you looked up and you realized that, for better or worse, you were hooked, and that some of you had to start creating new structures in your life. You had to start saying yes to some things and no to others.
So I would say that when I knew I wanted to be a playwright and a professional writer, but that there was no way to earn money doing that, maybe ever, certainly initially, the first huge change I made was to do my writing first. It sounds so simple, but if I could carve out X number of hours a day that was about writing, and the rest of the time it was about making a living, that meant that I was honoring my work and honoring that commitment and making it possible to give the best part of me to the work, and then make money with what was left over. That was my first decision.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, for me, in some ways I've been very narrow. I mean, if someone had asked me, and this may be by virtue of growing up with the daughter of 2 English professors, if you'd asked me when I was 6 what I wanted to be, I would have said a writer. And yet in this kind of childish way where I thought you want to be a writer, you become a writer. And I remember pretty clearly graduating from college and feeling just completely panicked about how I was going to go about things from then on, really desperately not wanting to graduate from college, which is probably why I ended up back in graduate school for quite a while. But and I guess among the things that I remember thinking about were, is it better to have a really dull job that demands nothing from you intellectually and then you can go home and write at night, or a really interesting job that throws you out into the world, or is there some happy medium? And if I look back at the course I think I did all of those things. I spent 1 year as a temp secretary and I think this can work for some people. I was miserable because I hated being bored. I hated being treated really badly. And I hated moving around to new places where I never knew what I was doing. And it just didn't work for me at all. I mean, I knew I was losing it when I started, stealing pencils from Harvard. I was a temp secretary in academia, which is really bad. You'd think they'd be nicer there, but they weren't. So then I also worked as a journalist for a while, and that actually was really wonderful in terms of giving me a lot of experience, sending me into situations I didn't know about, and having to kind of write on deadline, and I loved it, but I found what happened to the writing after it left my computer disturbing, because it was always, I was writing daily news, it got chopped, you didn't have the time you needed, and there were all sorts of parameters around it that I didn't want. And so eventually I ended up in graduate school and then in academia here, and have found that to be not always without its complications, but largely a really nice balance, and that I'm doing work that I find really interesting and stimulating when I'm teaching. And although it's pretty hard, I'm sure we'll get to this, to balance everything, being part of an English department leaves me also time to do my work. So I realize that I don't think this is true for everybody, and I have various writer friends who do things like write computer software or do technical writing, or even do jobs completely unrelated to being a writer. And I think that students should always think about those possibilities, because there's so many different paths. For me, I realized that I needed to do a job that was somehow connected to my writing life.
My first job then was as a freelance proofreader, which would be wee hours. I had complete control over my
Holly, you mentioned something about getting some resistance from your family. Could you say a little bit about that, more about that, and could you other folks perhaps address that? how do you sort of defend some of your choices? How do you negotiate the time you need with your loved ones to do what you need to do and still meet your responsibilities as family members and the like?
Well, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and I was basically the black sheep of my family. And so I started out that way, and they never knew what dance was. They knew Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and maybe some ballet, but they had no idea what even what Broadway was or modern dance for sure. So when I found dance and I really wanted to do that, they were appalled, and it was tough. It was tough for a few years, but basically I said, this is what I'm going to do because it's my life, it's not your life, and if it's your life, you can do whatever you want, Mom and Dad, but you're not telling me what I'm going to do with my life. And I was always a little combative that way, I guess you could say. I really stood up for what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do with my life, and I sort of done it. I sort of have done it on my own ever since. They haven't been financially supportive in any way since college, and they've actually never even seen my company perform. Believe me, I've worked it out. It's okay. I know it's sad, but it's okay. So it's tough. It's tough that way. It's tough because I don't get any reinforcement from them or my brother, who completely doesn't understand dance. He's a NASCAR driver. I don't mean to make this sound bad, but I've sort of divorced myself from that part of my life with my family. Now, that doesn't mean I don't talk to them. I still go and visit, and I still have a relationship with my parents and my family. But I have to do that in order to survive and do what I wanted to do with my life, and not be beholden to them. And in their eyes, in some ways, I've been a big disappointment because I didn't end up being a doctor or a veterinarian and having 3 or 4 kids and a golden retriever and an SUV. That was never important to me.
Now, Tommy, I said you might not have fully explored the possibilities of stock car driving in your choreography. That might be
It's always a possibility.
No, just count it out. Elizabeth Allard, you want to add anything to that in terms of your own family situations, negotiating, navigating that whole process?
It was a little mystifying to on one hand it was mystifying to my parents, on the other hand I see this direct link to my mother. The thing she would speak of with the most reverence was the written word. So that was something that I was immune to as a child. And I knew at a very young age, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, that I was a writer. But I had no idea what a playwright was. I had certainly never seen one or met one growing up in Rochester, New York. I'd never been to Broadway.
anything on the family piece for you, Elizabeth, or?
I mentioned briefly my family earlier. I mean, I think for me, my parents have been supportive, very supportive of what I've wanted to do and very tolerant of especially the early years when it's totally unclear if you can support yourself. And, you know, are you a writer before you're that sort of very inchoate time when you're just doing what you're doing in isolation or in small communities, which is something I hope we can talk about, things like writers groups and other sorts of, my parents actually are both readers for me, but I've had many other ways in which I've kind of created structures of community and collaboration and feedback. I mean, for me, in some ways, the biggest tension was both the gift and the problem of having parents who are English professors, and your mother writes about George Eliot, and your father writes about Samuel Beckett and Joseph Conrad, and you're sort of trying to write a short story. It can be a little stressful. So I think I went through a period as a kid when I was a huge reader, and I would not read books from my parents' shelves. I would go to the library and take out anything I wanted, and they were very nice about leaving me alone and not saying, why are you reading junk, you know, but so I always felt a need to kind of separate. And for me, at where I am in my current life, the question of family is from a totally different angle, and that's that I'm the mother of 2 little kids, and so the puzzle of how to put all of that together in terms of creativity and the intensity of the creative process, the intensity of parenting, the intensity of teaching, is something that I'm always trying to kind of get a grip on and shape. I think that would be an interesting panel, actually, parenting and creativity.
It's a good idea. It's a darn good
Anyway,
idea.
could make it to it.
Very good idea. Yeah, if you could find a babysitter, it would be difficult to make it to the session. Yeah. Well, let's follow the money for a moment. You all were talking, a couple of you were talking about other things you do to supplement your work as artists. How do you deal with the struggle to supplement your income? You know, are any of you in a position right now where you're making your living entirely from your art? And if not, what else? What other kinds of things are you doing? And how does that help or hurt? Because sometimes it can do both, actually. So what are some of your experiences with that piece?
Well, I wish I was making my living from art. I don't. I have good years and bad years in terms of what my work makes for me out in the public marketplace. And inevitably, a good year is followed by a very lean year, because good years take a long time to get back and momentum and motion. You've probably heard this, but the typical, the old saw in the theater world is you can't make a living, but you can make a killing. Meaning that nobody makes a living at this, and a couple of people make a whole lot of money on Broadway. The middle ground is the sort of place where most of us live, and probably where most of us are struggling to figure out how to keep going. Generally, my career tended to give me enough to keep me going for one more year. Say, okay, we got through 2001, let's see if we can get through 2002. And you know, there are periods of time where you're more or less comfortable with that. You know, that's a more difficult situation when there's a child in the picture. Fortunately, I'm married, and my spouse makes more money than I do. I couldn't be sustaining this as a single parent. I would not survive. There's no way I could do this without the support and help of my husband. That seems like an anti-feminist thing to say, so I'm slightly embarrassed to say that in public, because I consider myself a feminist, and pulling my own weight is critically important to me. However, that's sort of the reality of the world that we live in, and certainly art is art, and indulgence in some ways it is, but it's also my calling, so I suppose that's how I justify it. I would also say that I probably almost yearly have to decide, will I go on? And this is 20 years down the road. And, you know, is it worth it? There are a lot that's, we live with uncertainty, we deal with rejection. You can read my bio.
social life, really. Um, there are days when I teach too much and it takes time and energy away from being in the studio to create work, but I also love it. I love my students and I love teaching. Just very fortunate to have that job. Before that job came along, I was also very lucky to be in New York as a performer and actually lived there for 5 years with a weekly paycheck, but doing nothing but dancing. And I was like, godsend. That company folded because of the Maple Thorpe brouhaha with the NEA, and I chose not to stay in New York and do the talent halls and come back to Boston. But earlier in my career, when I was starting out, I did everything. I waited tables. I was an art model. I shopped for condos for rich people. I would go around to open houses and check out condos and houses and report back to them and say, you should buy this one, you should buy that one, whatever. I cleaned houses. That was a very lucrative business for a long time, but I could make my own hours and eat out of the refrigerator when they weren't home. Saved on food bills, tax-free. It was great.
We did promise you helpful, practical tips on just eat out of clients' refrigerators.
I've also, I hate to use this expression, but been a dance whore at times where I've done really awful shows for the money. A nightclub in Route 1 that paid me a lot of money for one night. It was great. I would never do it again. Industrial shows for insurance companies or runway shows for London Fog and Kenneth Cole. It was great, but it's just doesn't fulfill my soul, but it brought in the money. And luckily I don't have to do any of those things now. I got through that, and now I just teach to make the money. Thoroughly enjoying it. Wish I could do it soon.
Yeah, I would, with various alterations, these are sort of similar to my own story. I mean, the one thing I would say, maybe to add to that, is that although I also occasionally write pretty much purely for money, I published a little tiny essay in Parenting Magazine this fall, for which I got some ridiculous $3,500 or something. It took me a morning to write. I could slave on a short story for 7 months and not make that much money. But mostly I've tried to actually structure my life to separate market from the writing, from my writing of fiction when I'm writing fiction. I try to block it out because it just seems deadly to me to do it any other way in terms of the kind of stuff I'm trying to write, which is interior and sort of dark and sort of slow. And, it's not going to, I'm not writing commercial fiction. I don't want to be writing commercial fiction. And when I have made money, I think of it as sort of a windfall or a lottery, or I'm thrilled. I would not turn it away, but I don't depend on it. So in that way, teaching, which I also love, is the sort of regular paycheck, and I think it actually frees me up to take more chances with my writing because I'm not sitting there trying to think about how much money I'm going to get. The piece I'm working on, my last 2 novels, although I've also been lucky with publishing, my last 2 novels I wrote under contract, and while in some ways that was great because I have an editor I love to work with, and I had gotten an advance up front, and it allowed me to take some time off from teaching, it also put sort of time pressures, and in certain very subtle ways, I think also market pressures on the books. And I remember this book I'm not writing on contract, partly because I didn't want to, and partly because my last novel didn't sell that well, and it seemed inopportune to look for a contract at that particular moment. But I remember my editor, when I told, who I still have a really close relationship with and who I hope will publish my next book, when I told her about this book, and I said kind of what I said to you, like it might be stories, it might be, she said, we'll call it a novel, which is a totally market-driven comment. She's a literary editor, she's really smart, we work really well together, but I adore Slamdown at that point, and I thought I'm not showing her anything till I'm done, because I don't want her telling me to write a novel if I'm writing a bizarre collection of linked objects, And it's still in the back
what about work styles? Do any of you have any sort of rituals you need to structure your relationship with the work so it's easier for you to do it like a particular time or place or set of conditions you feel you need to really get your work done?
I used to, and now that I have kids, I write when the babysitter's there. I write when I have time. So I'm much less superstitious. I used to like to work at night. I'm by nature nocturnal. I don't write at night anymore. I've gotten really much better at kind of, here I am, this is my time, the clock's on, like do something. It doesn't always work, but I've gotten much less superstitious about rituals as my life has gotten more complicated, I guess. I mean, the one thing I would say is that occasionally I have a very close writing friend, and I'll zap her off an email saying I'm stuck on other people, or her really, one person, to do that.
I think it's different when you're more of a solitary artist and you work for yourself, and then you have 8 to 10 or 16 dancers staring at you, saying, you need to do something for us. And I have 2 hours, and I have, okay, what am I going to do? But my life is very structured too. We have set rehearsal class time, company class and rehearsals Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I teach at the conservatory. Really, every hour of every day is pretty much planned out with my life, where I have to be in teaching, rehearsing, and so forth and so on. That said, Diane and I, we choreograph pretty much everything together. So we choreograph everything, and it's really a joy because we can bounce ideas off of each other. If we get stuck, the other one is there, and 9 times out of 10, she is not stuck, or vice versa. I'm not stuck at that moment. Sometimes we do like a high five, like I'll do 8 counts, she'll do 8 counts, it's your turn. We'll do that. And we feed off of each other, so it's always a creative environment because it's rarely that both of us get down at the same time, or go down at the same time and can't come up with anything. But it is hard having 10 people staring at you saying, what are you going to do for us now? It's a lot of pressure in that way. But I don't have a ritual or superstitions or anything like that.
I know one writer, I forget who it was, I think back in the 18th century, he could only write if somewhere in the room was a basket filled with rotting apples. That was who? Well, it might have been, but I knew there was a writer who couldn't, unless he, go figure. I know somebody else who listens to Chopin piano etudes when he writes. He's very busy, he's a family person too, has limited time. So he listens to Chopin etudes every time he writes, and he never listens to them any other time. So it's like a Pavlovian response he set up. When he hears Chopin piano etudes, he gets to it. So, Laura?
I would echo Elizabeth that I certainly became abandoned in my superstitions when I was a child and being in my writing. I don't, I have different rituals. I approach things differently according to the medium that I'm in, whether it's a screenplay or a musical or an opera, and whether I'm in the middle of collaborating with a composer or just trying to generate ideas initially. Deadlines certainly strengthen my fortitude, and it's just do it.
Well, you just mentioned collaboration, and Elizabeth, earlier you mentioned collaboration and the importance of writers' groups and the like. What is the role of collaboration with other artists, with the audience, or with other artists? How does that play into your process? Does it have any bearing on why you're working, and how do you sort of navigate, negotiate the artistic directions or the decisions you make about how a piece is structured when you're working with other people? So basically, what are the different ways collaboration is played into your own work?
Everything we do is collaborative. Diane and I collaborate on all of our pieces, but at the same time, we also have a costume designer who works with us to make our costumes. We love to commission composers to work with us to make music. Financially, a lot of times we have to find music off of CDs and all but whenever we can raise the money or get a grant to have a composer, we love being in that situation where the composer's sitting next to us, we're in the studio, the dancers are there, and we make up the dance, he writes the music, he brings in the music, we make up the dance. It's a give and take thing with the composer. Same with set design. We also like to use a lot of set pieces and scenic elements in our work as well, and we always hire set design. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have ideas, and we say, this is what we're thinking about, and then you need to elaborate on that and create that for us. But pretty much all of our work is collaborative with many different people, 5, 6 different people, in order to get a whole evening production up and off the ground.
Do you ever find collaborating frustrating? I mean, is it always inspiring and enriching?
No. It's not inspiring, and it can be frustrating when you don't get to choose your collaborators. If a collaborator is given to us, like this particular opera company hired us to choreograph this opera last year, and we had they hired us to make the dances, and we had to work with the director and the stage director and the music director and the set designer and all that. And it got a little frustrating between all of the parties involved. But when we're doing our own work and creating pieces, we hire who we want to work with. And 9 times out of 10, 9.9 times out of 10, it's been great and easy and fun and successful.
Well, we have a couple of writers, so did you want to say something, maybe Elizabeth, could you say something about your experience with writers groups? You have a sort of a committed listener, one-on-one relationship with your friends.
Yeah, it's so different, and I'm fascinated by what you do, and when I hear about, or hear and think about choreography and playwriting, it makes me think I must really be a control freak, because it's really hard for me to, I'm very collaborative in that I work very closely with writer friends, and I need feedback, and my work goes through many, many stages before it reaches print, and has many voices in it. I also, I'm a fiction writer who does a huge amount of research, so there's many actual people involved along the way. You know, one novel I became friends with a beekeeper and followed him around. One I visited at camp, so there's actually human beings who aren't in general artists or writers or dancers or anything, but they're just people who are teaching me, and I love that part of it, but when it comes down to it, there's something about the actual composing part that's incredibly private for me and kind of inward, and also where I like to be master of my world, where I am in there kind of deciding who moves where and what happens, and very intuitively it's very hard for me to imagine then bringing in bodies, and it's fascinating to me that other forms can do that. The few experiences I've had with that is I've had short stories read a couple times by actors in things like, there's a program in New York called Selected Shorts where the actors read stories, and I found it painful, even though they did a really good job, and I kept thinking, my character that is not an Icelandic accent, that part was not supposed to be funny, and I also felt sort of miserable that I was being so possessive, and that I kind of couldn't let my story be flexible and go out into the world, and when I talk to readers, I don't have that reaction. I mean, I think I actually am open to people interpreting things differently, but it's something about it being voiced or somebody acting it. And I have a very set idea of sort of the rhythms and tone of things, and if someone's reading it themselves, I can't monitor it, so I give them more latitude. I think that when you see somebody actually interpreting it through a voice, I was just struck at that moment at how possessive I felt. I mean, not happy about it. I actually was sort of troubled by my own reaction, but
There are lots of lyrics you can't watch.
is that right? Okay. Makes me feel better. But in terms of writers groups, I was in one writers group starting when I was 22, and we met for years and years, and that group eventually had too many complications. It was like a dysfunctional family after a while. We met for maybe 15 years, and then we all started out completely unpublished, and now all of us, I think, have published something like 4 books. So we were incredibly supportive of each other, incredibly determined. We would meet and, do laundry and watch 30-something. I mean, it was not high literary salon. But then we turned to the work and really go at it. And one one of those people is still my closest writing friend, and I'm actually friends with the other ones still too. But especially before I was at all published, I think that was incredibly key, and still for me, having readers and people who can kind of talk through things and look at something in a really, really rough stage and be able to see its possibility and kind of know my work habits. I think it's really important to find the right people to work with and to trust them, and that can take a really long time, and it can be damaging if it's not the right relationship. It's a pretty tricky thing, but we're doing it.
Laura?
I had an epiphany about 5 years ago that there actually was no law written anywhere that I had to spend the rest of my writing life alone in a room. And because, that's kind of where you spend most of your time. And so I asked a friend of mine who was another playwright if she would just be willing to meet with me once a week and we would write together and sort of see how that worked. And we don't collaborate on the same thing, but we get together and write in the same place once a week. And over the 5 years we've been doing this, that's also evolved, our meetings have evolved to include a business aspect to the meeting because like most writers, I think the generalization here, the business side of the work I don't like. I don't like to write letters, I don't like to send a script out, I don't like to make phone calls. I could literally make a list of people I'm supposed to call today and just keep moving that list around until next year when it's not relevant anymore. And so that wasn't really helping me, in terms of getting my work out there. So when my friend's name is Leslie, when we started this business part of our meeting, we would sit there and make a list. We would first make a master list of what our goals for the year were, and then each week it's what are we doing this week to get there. And then you check in to see if you've done it. And so then it's embarrassing, that you make those 3 phone calls. So that's been kind of a key aspect to getting a little, just taking a lot of the emotion out of that part of the job that I have to do. And it's also been key for me to write with her every week because we agreed on 2 things. One, that we would actually write every time that we meet, and 2, that we would read what we write out loud every time. And a lot of work goes directly into the drawer. I don't know if any of you are starting things out because you begin, you're always beginning. It's page 1, it's page 2, and you've written it alone, and halfway into page 2 you needed a candy bar, or you need to clean the bathroom. I don't know, just anything to get you out of writing. But if you're sitting there across from your buddy and she's still writing, I don't know about you, but I get competitive. And I think, well, she's, I'm just dribbling, and she seems to really be coming up with something great. So, I would sort of push through those first defenses, which is all a trick to get us past that first defense. But the other issue and the key, and one of the reasons why this has worked well for us, is reading the work out loud, especially as playwrights. Of course, a lot of it's direct, and a lot of it does go in the drawer, and that's where it belongs. But reading it out loud, A, we honor the work. B, you can hear immediately where the life in the work is. And once you identify where the life in the work is, then you've got something to keep out. You keep that out and you keep on. And our output individually over the past 5 years, the number of works we've finished, the number of places those works have gone, just changed exponentially from when we were simply alone and sending along. So I'm a big advocate of finding some, if not a group, a single person who you can write with for some kind of support, because really there is no law out there that says you can do all the time, all by yourself.
Rejection, negative criticism, bad reviews, not that any of you have ever gotten anything like a bad review, but theoretically, if you were to get a bad review at some point, what are some of your ways of responding to that?
There's a big range of responses from, uproarious response to, right now there's somebody who wrote to me rejecting me, and this person was really nice. They read my work immediately. A friend recommended me, and they wrote me within weeks. It's never happened. They wrote me a nice letter saying, "I'm so sorry, what to do?" And I can't respond. And it's 6 months later, I can't respond to it. That rejection is so painful. It's like, gee whiz, my friend recommended trusted few people that you're going to talk to about your work in terms of where you're going next?
I'm not sure I should get started on critics and reviews. No offense. I have a couple of stories about critics. Knock on wood, luckily we've gotten many more good reviews than bad reviews, so that's always nice. The bad ones always hurt. If in my case, if I respect that critic and I respect their background and I respect their knowledge of the art form, then I really listen to their review and see if it can help me with my art. If for some reason I don't respect that critic or I don't think that person necessarily has a good background or a firm grasp of the art form, then I kind of go, well, I don't really care what you think, unfortunately, because they have to be knowledgeable and they have to understand that when you're a young artist, they can make or break you, and they can wield a lot of power. And one response to a bad review that we had was this one critic wrote this very long review and was not very nice about it, and at the end, for certain reasons, her last sentence, which was very uncalled for, she said, how rude that they would do this. Nothing to do with the performance, that we didn't put the bios in the program, we posted the bios on the board outside the theater, and she didn't see them, so she thought we were ignoring the dancers and the musicians, and she said, how rude of her. But we turned around and took that and put it on a t-shirt, and it says, Prometheus Dance, how rude. We sold all of them, it was great. So around. The other story I have about a critic is this one critic came to our performance and absolutely just sort of panned one piece in this program that we had. A year later, and she said, they need to work on this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. A year later, we did the same piece. We didn't work on it. It's exactly the same piece. Exactly the same cast, too. She saw it and loved it. Absolutely loved it. Said, they did great work. They worked on it, they improved it, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, hello. So you never know. You never know about that. But I always get to take it the next day after the performance and see what they have to say. I always want to know. So, they do have a power over us in a way that can be very good. They can also, if not used correctly, can hurt.
Because it's gotten narrower and the New York Times book review which was kind of the place that used to review editorship, changed drastically. Many daily papers that used to be fiction also. I more feel like, kind of lucky to get reviewed in the first place. And I guess in some ways at this point I'm more interested in sort of ways to create more venues and questions of how to interest people in that kind of work and questions that are about reviews.
There's an old saying that a bad review is better than no review at all. It gets you out there, your name's out there, and they forget. The public does forget. They do remember the name, but then they forget after a while what the review actually said. So,
Plus, it's amazing what publicists can do, that you can take this sort of a flawed but sometimes occasionally wonderful novel and just put wonderful on the paperback, A few ellipses.
wonderful, dot.
That's dry. That seems like a good place then to open it up to the audience. We're going to take some questions now. We're going to ask that you raise your hand to be recognized and that you use the mic. We are recording this event, and so we need you to use the mic so that other people later can enjoy the evening and your interesting questions. So who'd like to get us started? Who has a question?
Hi, my question, thank you all for sharing tonight. My question was mostly directed to something that Elizabeth had said earlier about shutting down market, a concept of market when you're writing. But I've opened it to all three. I think, and there's been a subtext tonight about public funding and everything else like that. I think there's an uneasy home for art and the artist in a free market society like we have here. And I'm wondering at what point that you differentiate between market and audience, because they meld together in such a convoluted way that at one side, I think disdain for market influence can end up alienating an artist from an audience. So I just was wondering if anybody could address that.
I feel no disdain for market. Most of my work is not particularly commercial, and I have to live with the fact that there's not a big market that's going to be interested. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to use a marketing tool to find my audience. And it's just being, I think, quite realistic about what you're doing for whom. And building an audience. I mean, one of the difficulties about being an independent artist is that I work with companies all over the country. And so building a market for me, for my work, is a little bit difficult to imagine. I'm not a company like Tommy is, who's performing for the most part here and then elsewhere, where he can build, there is probably an audience building, community building in this world. It's a little bit different.
It's hard, yes. We try to build an audience here, but we do art that we want to do, and we don't try to do art that we know will sell necessarily. If it does sell, great. We have sold out houses a month, great. We don't, well, we don't, but we're still going to do the art that we think is important, that's important for us to do. Like this piece about refugees. I know that's not going to be a huge smash piece. It's just not what we really want to go to the theater for. I could have been a Broadway choreographer or a music video choreographer and made a lot of money, but I don't think that would have satisfied my soul. That's not what I wanted. Would not have made me happy. I don't know how long I would have stayed without theater. So I chose not to do that and do my more niche artistic field in, and I think it's very important. There's a need for it, but I know it's not going to be a big seller. It's just something I have to accept, and I'm okay with it. Let's fight it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, audience, I think you're right that you can't, writing or any of the things that we do are implicitly communicative acts, right? So if I'm writing something, on some level, there's a consciousness I'm writing towards. I mean, I'm trying to communicate something, right? I'm trying to sort of put it inside a language and grammar and structures and that I think are going to be understood by somebody else. So that's all there, but I guess what I meant, and which holds true in terms of audience as well as market, is that when I'm actually doing it, when I'm writing first drafts and it's actually going well, it feels very divorced from that. And it's hard to get to that stage. You know, we talked about cutting out static in various ways. It's very hard to do. And I too have done that thing of being in the presence of another person and hearing the clicking of the keyboard. It's incredibly helpful. And that's an audience in a certain way, and competition and all sorts of things. But I really, really try to shut it out and to tunnel into what feels like a dream world. I mean, the thing that writing, when it's going well, is the closest to for me is kind of imaginative childhood play, which I did for my entire childhood. And I think part of the reason I began to write seriously is that I started to get teased for playing with dolls. I mean, as an adolescent, I couldn't keep up. I really started to be ridiculed, and I had to kind of shift it into a different mode. And then the market part, you know, I go off and do my little round of readings and go to Oregon where there's 3 people in the store, and, you know, Newtonville Books where there's 40 because I'm from here. You know, I certainly not, that other end of it, I actually in certain ways enjoy. I just went to a book group where I love talking about my characters. I like talking to readers, so it's not, I like seeing the result of the communication at the other end, and I'm certainly not writing stuff that's like so experimental that it's not, doesn't have any market niche. I mean, I'm being published by a New York house that sees, they're not getting rich off me, but it is it's got some sort of audience, but I didn't set off to do that. And I will say, my first novel, I was actually telling one of our grad students at BC this, my story collection got published through a contest when I was very young, and I kind of thought I'm through the door. My first novel, Unraveling, which was eventually published and did quite well, got turned down 25 times. And the letters just kept saying, too bleak, too dark, too inward, too bleak, too dark, too inward, beautifully written, too bleak. And I don't know why, when I look back, I think that I had stamina, but I kept rewriting it, and I liked it, I worked really hard on it, and it has its flaws. I can see all its flaws, but and that was a moment where the audience came very full into my face, because the letters would overtly say, we don't think we can sell this. And when it eventually got taken, my editor, who's still my editor, said to me that she did a grassroots campaign at her publishing house and had everybody read it, all the secretaries, everybody in the house, and had them come to the publisher and say, because she knew she was going to run into resistance, and I lucked out. I mean, it could easily have not found her. So, 25 letters.
I saved my rejection letters. You could paper your bed. Maybe a larger one.
Other questions? Right here in front. And we do appreciate it.
Laura, I noticed that you've had a parallel career working in music theater to working in straight plays. And I wondered about that, like how you got into writing librettos, how it's different, what your experience has been like. All right.
Early on in my career, I was really lucky and became a member of this playwright service organization called New Dramatists in New York, where once you get in the door, you're there for 7 years, because they understand how long it takes for anybody to get into it. And while you're there, you can workshop your plays. And this was back in the late 80s, and something started happening there, which was called the Composer Librettist Studio. And it was run by this great guy named Ben Krywaus, who ran a program for Opera America called Opera for the 80s and Beyond. And it was started because people had recognized that there were very few American operas. Oh, that's real nice. There were very few American operas that ever saw a second performance following a premiere. And they positively thought that this was because most operas were written with the European model in mind, and the 19th century model, which is the composer is king and the librettist is not important. And so they began they began pairing composers and playwrights, thinking, well, what happens if we get people who are actually skilled at writing for the theater, writing for opera? And it was a really exciting time, because I don't know if any of you were alive then, but in the 80s there was actually some money. And not only was I paid to do this wonderful 2-week workshop where it was very promiscuous, you worked with a different composer every day, and you were writing an aria today and a duet tomorrow and a big chorus on Friday. But the people running it would say, well, I work at, what happened to me was somebody knew somebody at Portland Opera, and the next thing I knew, I was invited to come with the composer of Portland Opera for 3 weeks. They were going to give us 3 singers in a room and said, please don't prepare anything before you get here. We want you to hear the singers and create something for them. Wow. And they paid us. This is unheard of. So that's what opened the door for me. And as a sidelight to that, I would say, walk through any door that ever opens up for you. I didn't know that I wanted to do this. I didn't know that I was going to be, I thought, oh, gee, I could be really horrible. Like, what if the composer's laughing? This could be awful. Here I am feeling kind of good, and I could really fail big time. But every door I've ever walked through that seemed like, where the hell am I going, has always turned out to be really interesting. There were 2 parts to your question. That's how I got started. Your other piece of the question was? It's completely different from playwriting. It is absolutely, collaboration is either heaven or hell. You're often getting married and getting into bed with a composer before you've had your first date. And by that I mean, we have never written a song together, and suddenly we're working at Houston Grand Opera and we have a $100,000 commission. And we don't even know if we can sit across and have at the table and have a cup of coffee together yet, right? So that it's a little crazy in that way. Some composers are fabulous, and you would, want to have your children with them. Other composers, it'd be really great if you've never met. And I've had absolutely a gamut of the experience, from the very wonderful to the absolute hideous. And it's when it's wonderful, it's so good that it's better than sex and drugs. And it's really amazing. And when it's horrible, it's equally as horrible. So that's the kind of thing that keeps you going. Ultimately, though, what happens is you start to get a little smarter about, wow, that first conversation I had with that guy, didn't really like something that's going on there. Well, now I listen to that little voice, whereas before I'd be like, what, there is a commission. There's $200 on the table. Come on, let's go. And the process is very, very different. I also write longhand, and when I'm writing lyrics, I have to be moving. I'm generally walking or swimming or doing something while I'm writing them. There's a real physical part of lyric writing, and just an art.
We had a question in the back.
This is a question specifically for you, Laura, and for Tommy. Because you work in a collaborative field, both of you, do you have a specific story where you remember a designer, dancers, directors, actors that actually changed your work, that made it make a new turn, did something new because of that collaboration?
My career, my career path?
No, a piece that you're working on, how that collaboration with a designer or a dancer, an actor, director, and suddenly, how does that happen for you?
Well, I remember a really horrible experience where I was commissioned to choreograph the Bacchae, and the director absolutely loved it. She came into rehearsal and absolutely loved it, and we were all happy, kissy-lovey with each other. It was great. And the producer walked in and said she hated it and she was going to change it herself. And I said, no, you won't. That's my work, not yours. She goes, but I'm paying your bill and I will change your work and I will change it. She proceeded to do that, and I said, and take me off of the credits because I don't want my name on this. This is not mine. I don't like what you did to me. That was a horrible experience. A great experience was when we choreographed Nixon in China for Opera Boston 2 years ago. And the director, Scott Edmondson, was a doll, and he basically let us do the whole second act ourselves, because it was the whole Mao ballet, propaganda ballet, and the company was dancing it, and we were choreographing it, and he sort of says, you have the second act, and we could do what we wanted to with the singers, the dancers, the set, all of that stuff, and he was there and said, why don't you think about doing this way possibly? He would sort of nudge us in these directions, but it was actually our choice of what happened. He did the first act, he did the third act, and we sort of did the second act, and it was terrifying, but it was also extremely fulfilling, great. So, and that was the first opera that we had ever done. It was a magnificent experience.
No one can change a word that I write without my permission. I'm the owner of my words, and that's one of the reasons why I stay in the theater, because in the theater the writer is me. My feeling about collaboration, I would say that, there are times when production diminishes your work. I've certainly experienced those productions. But my philosophy over the years has become one of giving it away. And that if course, we all want to be in control of what happens. We're, control freaks more or less. But I find if you don't really give it away and let there be chaos and let there be something that wasn't expected, in fact, that very chaos and it's that alchemy that makes the theater experience magic. And it is terrifying because giving it away means you risk seeing something you don't want to see. Whereas you also potentially are going to see something more wonderful than you imagined.
We have time for a couple of more questions. You're in front here.
I want to thank you all so much for just opening up and letting us share in your experiences first. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I would like to experience more of your artwork, and I wanted to ask, I guess especially Laura and Tommy, if you have any performances going on now or soon that we could see, and Elizabeth, if you have any new books coming out soon, please tell us.
I'm writing a new musical, which you can see at Suffolk University in April. It's not even titled yet. I have a new opera that's going to have its first workshop production at Palm Beach Opera, if you happen to find yourself in Florida in April. And Nicole and Bonaparte will be done at the Co Festival in Amherst in July. And we've also plans to take it to La Mama in New York in October. But between me and that moment, there's a lot of fundraising. The KO Festival, International Festival that happens in Amherst. They're a wonderful theater.
You can always check out our website, musicstance.org. Right now it's being updated, still last year's schedule on there. But it's being revamped, and like probably by January 1st it'll be up with the new season. But we're performing the first night, if you'd like to see that, at John Hancock Hall. We actually have, I didn't mention this, but we actually have two companies now. We have the main company, and we have the Prometheus Dance Elders Ensemble, which is 8 ladies, 60 to 83 years old. And they're just beautiful. They're just beautiful. And they have a whole weekend concert of their own in April at the Dance Complex, and then the main company is performing in May, the end of May, at the Boston Conservatory.
I am in the early to middle stages of the book, so don't hold your breath. But what do I have coming up? I have a couple things coming out in anthologies and local readings. One at Newtonville Books, I think. One at, I don't remember the dates, Middlesex Community College, I think. One at Brookline Booksmith. A couple essays and stories coming out in anthologies in the next 3 or 4 months.
Those are good questions, thanks. You had a question?
I think I thought of this when you spoke about that there are much less ways of being reviewed. Elizabeth spoke about that. And then it made me think of the question, which I struggle with a lot, of what ways have you found, or do you find it necessary to have education of the audience part of your work? Or what ways have you found, or ways of creating more artistic conversation in this country? And I'm sure you probably do that a lot as far as your teaching, but in other ways, and just what your experience is.
That question could be an entire evening in itself. It's a very good question.
This past year, on the way to the production of N. Bonaparte, we did 3 workshops, and the third workshop was revelatory. We called it Open Rehearsals. And we would do anywhere from 60 to 75 minutes of the show, and then sit everybody in the cast and the designers, sit and talk to whoever was in our audience. That was, you could say, oh, we're just doing that to make it look like we're opening up our process to the public. But in fact, it was incredibly interesting to all of us. We were each workshop we added additional elements to the piece, and we're testing them out. Is this working
first question is, what about pizza meat? And my answer to that is, what did you think it meant? And then they start, and then they open up, and 9 times out of 10, they're right. They know exactly what it was and what it was all about. They just wanted validation. They just wanted me to say, yes, that piece is about so-and-so and so-and-so. That said, we don't put program notes in our program. We put notes in there that explain the pieces because I don't want to tell them. I don't want to spoon feed an audience. I want the audience to get what they get out of the piece. If it's what I want, great. If it's their own experience, great. So, but I always have a dialogue with the audience after performances, and it's eye-opening, relative to it. Relevant. See, that's why I'm not a writer.
Takes things in a slightly different direction, but I guess I think it is really important to not only educate audiences who are at performances or readings or things, but to try to broaden the base in some ways. And so things like what MCC and the NEA and things like Poets in the School and just getting kids to be reading more. And I do try to do all sorts of things through my teaching at Boston College, and then in the slippers of time I have left, I've done things like been a mentor, writing mentor to a prisoner, which is an incredibly interesting experience through the mail. I do some stuff in elementary schools occasionally, which is fun. I actually went recently, because I have a daughter in kindergarten, to her classroom and did a little storytelling workshop, and I said to them, what's a character? And they nearly all, except my daughter who doesn't watch TV and so is already out of it, started saying Spider-Man and Barney, and they were all talking about TV characters, and it was just striking to me that at that level, 5-year-old, that it may just be their association with the word character, but I guess I do, I have a bumper sticker on my car that says read, I just think anyway that especially in today's culture, sort of media and email and sound bites, and that people can be encouraged to slow down and sort of do something that's quiet and solitary and coming, this sounds sort of reactionary, printed page, a pair of eyes looking at it is good.
Good point. Is there any brief last words you want to, any parting shots you all have for folks? That was a nice parting wave. Sort of the Newport wave. And if you don't have anything, it doesn't have to be something profound. It could be something my next show or, whatever.
I have a quote, since I don't have anything profound to say myself, which is that E.L. Doctorow once said, writing is like driving, I may be getting it slightly wrong, writing is like driving at night. You can only see as far as the headlights shine, but you can make the whole trip that way.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. Well, I think that's a good point to end on. Thank you so much. Thank you.